Life had been moving smoothly for us, or so we thought. My name is Sarah, I'm 34 years old, and I work at a mid-sized tech company as a project manager. My husband, Mike, is an IT specialist at the same company. We'd met at work, fallen in love, and continued to build our careers side by side even after getting married. Everything seemed perfect. Mike's parents, especially his mother, were always very kind to me. They treated me like their own daughter, and I was grateful for their support, especially when work became overwhelming. The idea of us all living together came from Mike's parents. They had a large property, and they proposed that we build a house on the land so we could all be closer. At first, I was hesitant, but the thought of family nearby sounded comforting. We didn't have kids yet, and I felt this arrangement would bring us all closer. So, we agreed. We renovated the old guest house on their property and turned it into a modern, comfortable home. It was a big investment, but Mike and I had stable jobs and plenty of savings. We were proud of how everything turned out. The guest house, though old, had a strong foundation, and after the renovations, it felt like our little sanctuary. Life was good. On weekends, we'd enjoy tea with Mike's parents, chatting about our future and dreams. Then, one day, everything changed. Mike's father, who had always been active and healthy, suddenly collapsed. It was a normal Wednesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of a meeting when I got the call. My heart dropped as I rushed to the hospital, unsure of what to expect. When I arrived, I found Mike by his father's side, tears streaming down his face. His father was hooked up to machines, barely clinging to life. The doctor pulled us aside and explained that he had suffered a major stroke. His condition was critical. I couldn't believe it. Just days before, we had been laughing together over tea, and now he was on the brink of death. The next few hours were a blur of anxiety and waiting. Despite the doctor's best efforts, Mike's father never woke up. He passed away quietly in the night, leaving us all devastated. The grief that followed was overwhelming. Mike's mother, who had always been strong, retreated into herself. She stopped coming out of the house and spent most of her days in her room. Mike and I tried to be there for her as much as possible. We worked from home more often to keep her company, but over time she insisted she was fine. So gradually we went back to our usual routine, though things were far from normal. That's when Betty started coming around more often. Betty was Mike's brother, Mark's wife. They had gotten married suddenly, just a year before Mike's father passed away. It was one of those whirlwind romances. Mark had met Betty, fallen head over heels, and within 6 months they were married. Betty, who had been working at a small office, quit her job to become a full-time housewife right after they tied the knot. Shortly after, they had their first child. Mike's parents had been thrilled to become grandparents. They spoiled the baby with gifts, and Betty seemed to relish in their attention. She was always showing off, reminding everyone how lucky her son was to have such doting grandparents. Meanwhile, Mike and I had been married for years but hadn't had any children. We weren't in a rush. We were focused on our careers and each other, and Mike's parents never pressured us. But Betty? She always had a smug look on her face whenever the topic of kids came up. It felt like she was silently mocking us for not having children, as if her having a child made her superior in some way. Things started to feel strange when Betty began visiting Mike's mother more frequently. At first, I thought she was just being helpful, keeping Mike's mom company during the day when we were at work. But something about the timing of her visits seemed off. She would always come over when Mike and I weren't around, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she had some ulterior motive. Mike didn't see it that way. "Maybe she's just trying to help Mom out," he said whenever I voiced my concerns. "Mom's lonely, and she probably appreciates seeing her grandson." Mike had a point, so I pushed down my suspicions and carried on, trying to ignore the unease growing in my gut. 6 months passed since Mike's father's death, and things took an unexpected turn. One afternoon, Mike's mother called us over for what seemed like a casual visit. We sat down in the living room, expecting to chat about family or upcoming holidays. Instead, she dropped a bombshell. "You know, Mark's been struggling with his job," she began. "Betty and Mark aren't doing too well financially." Mike and I exchanged confused glances. This seemed like a strange way to start a conversation. Mike's mom continued, "So, I've been thinking. You two have stable jobs and no kids. you have some flexibility. I'd like you to give the guest house to Mark and Betty." I blinked, stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Give up the guest house, the home we had spent months renovating and investing in? Betty's plan had finally revealed itself. Over the last 6 months, she must have been convincing Mike's mother to hand over the guest house to her. And now, here we were, blindsided by this sudden request. Mike, always the calm one, tried to reason with his mother. "It's not that simple, Mom. We've put a lot into the house. It's hard to just give it up." His mother nodded, almost as if she had anticipated his hesitation. "I understand," she said. "I'll cover the renovation costs. You won't be at a loss." We were speechless. Even with the offer to cover our costs, it still felt wrong. This was our home, and now we were being asked to give it up without any real consideration of how it would affect us. But that wasn't even the worst part. Betty and Mark were already making plans to move in, assuming we'd agree without hesitation. "We've told Mike and Sarah that we plan to give you the guest house," Mike's mother said, turning to Mark. "Don't worry. If you move in, Betty will take care of all the housework and look after me. You won't have to do anything." My heart sank. Betty, who could barely keep her own home in order, was now offering to do all the housework for both households. It seemed like a ridiculous proposition. But then, Betty, with a confident smile, chimed in. "You'll be so much happier. You won't have to worry about anything. Just leave it all to me. I'll even handle caregiving for your mom." I could feel Mike tense beside me. This was too much. "We can't just move out overnight," Mike said firmly. "We both work. We need time to find a new place." Betty's smile faltered for a moment, but then she recovered. "Of course, I understand," she said sweetly. 3 months should be enough, right?" I nodded, though I still felt a knot in my stomach. Something about this whole situation felt off. And then Betty dropped the final bomb. "You guys will move into the main house with Mom, right?" she said, her tone casual, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. Mike and I froze. Move into the main house? We hadn't agreed to that. Why would we move in with his mother when Betty and Mark were perfectly capable of living there? Betty continued, undeterred by our shocked expressions. "It'll be perfect. You can live here with Mom, and I'll come over to do the housework. That way you don't have to worry about anything. And of course, we'll need to work out some payment for my services." That was it. The final straw. Mike stood up, his face red with anger. "You expect us to not only give up our house, but also pay you to do housework? Are you serious?" Betty's confident expression crumbled, and tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm just trying to help," she sniffled. "I can't work right now because of the baby, and we all know housework is a full-time job." Mike wasn't having it. "Housework is part of life. We're not paying you for something we can do ourselves." Betty burst into tears, and Mark, looking uncomfortable, tried to calm her down. But the damage had been done. Mike and I knew what we had to do. We left that night, determined to find a new place to live as soon as possible. Within a week, we found a luxury condo in the city. It was perfect for us, modern, spacious, and far away from the drama that had unfolded at Mike's family home. We moved out quietly, leaving behind the guest house and all the memories we had made there. As for Betty and Mark, they moved into the guest house, but things didn't go as smoothly as they had planned. With Mark's low income and Betty's lack of work, they struggled financially. And Betty, who had promised to take care of Mike's mother, quickly lost interest in her so-called responsibilities. Within a month, she had hired someone else to do the housework, while she spent her days out shopping or visiting friends. Mike and I couldn't help but laugh when we heard the stories from his mother. Betty had even presented an itemized bill for her services, demanding $2,500 a month. We had made the right decision to walk away. And just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, I discovered I was pregnant. The news came as a complete surprise, but we were overjoyed. We would be a family of 3 by the end of the year, and I couldn't wait to start this new chapter in our lives, far away from the drama that Betty and Mark had created. We didn't tell them about the pregnancy right away. In fact, we kept our distance, only visiting on holidays and for Mike's father's memorial. Betty still called occasionally, fishing for sympathy or help, but I made it clear that we had our own family to focus on now. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but in the end, it worked out for the best. We had our home, our happiness, and soon, our baby. The rest of it,